The day they threw me out was the day I turned 18. Not released. Not aged out. Thrown out. That's what it feels like when you walk into a gray government office on a Tuesday morning in November. And a tired woman with kind eyes slides an envelope across a metal desk. And just like that, your childhood is over. No cake, no candles. Just a bus ticket and a pat on the back. My name is Hazel Marie Whitcomb. And on that morning, I lost the last thing I had left. Not my grandmother. She'd been gone 2 years already. Not my parents. I'd lost them when I was 12. That morning, I lost my little brother Wesley. 16 years old. Still stuck inside the system. And there was nothing I could do about it. Or so I thought, because in that envelope was something else. A small box, wrapped in brown paper, my grandmother's handwriting on top, and inside that box was a silver cross. A letter, and the first clue to a truth so dark, so hidden, so carefully buried under a Kansas prairie for 6 years, that when I finally uncovered it, it would tear my whole life apart before it put it back together. If you've ever felt invisible, unwanted, like the world was closing its doors on you one by one, please, stay with me, because this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, and let me tell you what I found. My name is Hazel Marie Whitcomb, and on the morning of November 8th, I turned 18 years old. I want to tell you something about that day, because most people, they remember their 18th birthday. They remember the cake, the candles, somebody laughing too loud at the dinner table, a cheap card from an aunt with $20 folded inside. I remember a folding chair, gray plastic, cracked down the middle, in an office painted the color of dishwater, in downtown Wichita, Kansas. At exactly 8:47 in the morning, there was a woman across from me. Her name was Ms. Loretta Hayes, 58 years old, silver hair pulled back in a low bun, reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. And she had the kindest eyes I had ever seen on a woman who worked for the state. But her eyes were tired. Everyone's eyes were tired. In that building. Well, Hazel, she said, and she tried to smile. She really tried. This is the big day. She slid an envelope across the desk. Manila. Thick. Heavy. My whole life summarized in 11 documents, and a photocopy of a photocopy. Everything you need is in here, sweetheart. Birth certificate, social security card, final placement report, and a bus voucher, good for one ride, anywhere the Greyhound goes. I looked at the envelope. I didn't touch it, because touching it would make it real. And if it was real, then I was really being let go. Outside the window, a slow November rain was falling. The kind that isn't quite rain and isn't quite sleet. The kind that makes the world look like an old photograph somebody left out in the yard. I watched it slide down the glass in gray streaks. And I thought about my brother, Wesley. 16 years old. Freckles across his nose. A cowlick that never laid flat no matter how much water he put on it. My little brother, who was, at that exact moment, sitting in a group home 27 miles east of me, waiting for someone to come tell him what happens next. And nobody was coming, because I was the only one left, and I was being sent away. Ms. Hayes, I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. What about Wesley? She set her pen down, slowly, the way you set down something breakable. Hazel. He's 16. I know how old he is, sweetheart. He needs me. I know he does. So why can't I take him? She looked at me, and for one long second, I saw something behind her eyes that wasn't professional. Something that wasn't in the state manual. Something that looked almost personal. Then it was gone. Honey, she said, you don't have a home. You don't have a job. You don't have a bank account. You have... She glanced at the file. $63 and a bus voucher. The court won't even hear a guardianship petition until you can prove stability. That takes time. That takes work. Stability, that word. It landed on the desk between us like a coin nobody wanted to pick up. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. Short, dry. A sound like a door creaking. Stability, I said. Right? Ms. Hayes flinched a little. Then she reached into her desk drawer, and she pulled out something I wasn't expecting. A small box, wrapped in brown paper, soft, faded, tied with a piece of twine gone brittle with age. And on the top, written in a hand I would have recognized in the dark, at the bottom of a well in 1,000 years, was my name, Hazel Marie, my grandmother's handwriting. This came in with your grandmother's effects, Miss Hayes said. Her voice had gone very quiet. The instructions were clear. Give it to Hazel on her 18th birthday. Not before. I couldn't move. My hands were in my lap, and I couldn't lift them, because that piece of brown paper was the last thing my grandmother would ever touch and pass to me. And the moment I took it into my hands, that thread would be complete, and she would be all the way gone. Take it, sweetheart, Miss Hayes said. I took it. It was so light, almost weightless, like she had wrapped up a breath. I traced my name on the paper with my thumb, the loop of the H, the little curl at the end of the E. My grandmother's handwriting had gotten shakier at the end. I knew that from the birthday cards she'd sent to the group home. The last one had my name in letters that looked like they'd been drawn by candlelight in a moving car. This was that same hand. Cordelia Whitcomb. Everyone in Willow Bend, Kansas had called her Della. I had called her Grandma, and she had raised me from the age of 12. Until she couldn't anymore. Hazel, Miss Hayes said gently, take your time. But I do have another appointment at 9:15. Right? Of course. My childhood, ending at 9:15 sharp. I stood up. The plastic chair scraped the linoleum. A long, thin sound. I picked up the envelope and the box, and I walked out of that office without another word. Down a long hallway that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee, past a water fountain that had a handwritten sign taped to it. Out of order. Out of order. Everything was out of order. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the rain, and the cold hit me like a slap across the face. I didn't have a coat that fit. The one I had was 2 sizes too big and smelled like the last girl who wore it. But I put it on anyway, because that's what you do. You put on the coat that doesn't fit, and you walk, and you keep walking. I made it to the bus stop 3 blocks away. Sat down on a wet metal bench under a leaking plastic awning. And that's where I finally opened the box, because I couldn't wait anymore. I had to see her, even if it was just her handwriting. Even if it was just one more piece of paper. The twine snapped in my fingers. Inside the box was almost nothing. A letter, folded once, my name on the front, and a small silver cross on a silver chain. Tarnished, worn thin at the edges. I recognized it before I even picked it up. She had worn that cross every day of her life. I lifted it out, felt warm, which was impossible, because everything in that box had been sitting in a state storage locker for 2 years. But it felt warm anyway, like she had just taken it off her neck and handed it to me. I put it around my own neck, and I opened the letter. The paper was thin, like an old church program, and the handwriting was shakier than I remembered. My darling Hazel Marie, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a grown woman, and I could not be prouder of you if I had climbed a mountain to see you standing on top. I don't have much time to write this, and there is much I cannot say in a letter, because letters can be found, and what I am about to give you must not be found. Not yet, not by the wrong hands. I need you to do exactly as I say. There is a bus station in Millbrook, Kansas, 42 miles north of Wichita. On the old highway, the station is closed now, but the lockers are still there. Nobody uses them anymore. Nobody remembers them. You will find locker number 47. The combination is our anniversary. Yours and mine. The day I first held you as a baby. You know, the one. Inside that locker is everything I could not put in this box. Everything I could not tell you when you were a child. Everything you will need. Please, my sweet girl, do not tell a soul. Not Wesley. Not anyone at the state. Not even the kindest person you meet. Not until you have opened locker 47 and read what is inside. Trust the Lord. Trust yourself. And trust your grandmother, even from the grave. I love you. I have always loved you. And I have loved Wesley too with every breath I ever drew. Be brave, my Hazel Marie. Grandma Della. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. And I sat there in the rain on a wet metal bench with a silver cross around my neck and a letter from a dead woman in my hands. And I did not cry, because I couldn't, because there wasn't anything left in me to cry with. But something inside my chest went very, very still, like a bird that had been beating its wings against a window for 2 years, finally stopped and listened. The bus came 15 minutes later. The driver looked at my voucher, and then at me, and then at the sky like he was checking to see if God was watching. Where you headed, hon? Millbrook. He squinted. Millbrook, Kansas? Nobody goes to Millbrook. I do. He shrugged, punched the ticket, nodded me on. I sat in the very back. Nobody else was going north on a Tuesday morning in November. Just me, and a bus driver named Earl, and the rain. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched Wichita disappear. The city thinned out first, then the suburbs, then the strip malls with their peeling signs, then the last gas station, and then there was nothing, just the plains. Have you ever seen the Kansas plains in November? They are the loneliest thing on God's earth. Flat brown fields stretching all the way to the sky, broken fence posts, a single tree, bent by the wind, standing in the middle of a field like it forgot where it was going. The sky so wide it made my chest hurt. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the last time I saw her. She'd been sitting in a chair by the window of that little house on Sycamore Street, a blanket over her knees, her hair thin and white as milkweed. She had held my hand and said, "You look so much like your mama." And I had said, "I'll come see you next week, Grandma." But I hadn't, because the group home didn't let us. And she'd passed 3 days later, and I hadn't been there, and I hadn't gotten to say goodbye, and I had been so angry with her, for getting sick, for dying, for leaving us in that place, for letting them take Wesley and me apart. I had been so angry, and now all of a sudden, sitting on that bus, I wasn't sure my anger had ever belonged there. I pulled out my phone, a cheap prepaid thing with a cracked screen. I typed with my thumb, "Hey Wes." The reply came back in about 10 seconds. "Old lady, you out?" "Yeah. Just left. They give you a big send-off? Balloons? A cake shaped like freedom? They gave me a bus voucher and told me not to come back." Classic. I smiled. I hadn't smiled in a while. Felt strange on my face, like I was borrowing somebody else's expression. I typed again, "I love you, Wes." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, disappeared. Finally, "Love you too, Hayes. Come get me." I stared at those 3 words until the screen went dark. Come get me. I closed my eyes, and I promised him, right there, on a Greyhound bus rolling north, through the rain toward a town nobody had heard of. I promised my little brother, "I'm coming, Wes. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I'm coming." The bus pulled into Millbrook at 11:20 in the morning. Millbrook wasn't so much a town as it was a rumor, a gas station, a grain elevator, a Baptist church with the paint peeling off the steeple. And on the far edge of what used to be the main road, the old bus station, boarded up, faded blue paint, a sign above the door that still said Millbrook Depot in letters that had once been proud and were now just tired. Earl pulled the Greyhound to the shoulder. "You sure this is where you want off, hon?" "Yes, sir. Ain't much out here." "No, sir." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he opened the door. "Well," he said, "good luck." I stepped down onto wet gravel. The bus pulled away, and I stood there, in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. in a coat that didn't fit, with a silver cross around my neck and $63 in my pocket. And I watched that greyhound get smaller and smaller until it was just a dot. And then it was gone. And it was just me, and the wind, and the depot. I walked up to the building. The front door was chained shut, padlocked, but my grandmother hadn't said the front door. I walked around the side. There was a broken window, a trash barrel underneath it that I could stand on, and a gap just big enough for a girl my size to slip through. Grandma had known. Grandma had known. I climbed up. I squeezed through. I dropped down onto a dusty tile floor inside a room that smelled like mildew and forgotten things. And when my eyes adjusted, I saw them, a wall of lockers, rusted, green, numbered in stenciled paint that had cracked and flaked, rows and rows of them running the length of the wall. I walked toward them slowly, like I was walking up the aisle of a church. 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47. My grandmother's little joke. The number of years she had been married to my grandfather before he passed. I had heard her mention it 1,000 times. It was our anniversary, she used to say. Not just his and mine. All three of us. Yours and his and mine. I spun the combination dial. The date I was born. Click. The lock released with a sound so soft it should not have been possible after all these years. I pulled the door open, and I looked inside. There was a canvas bag, army green, old, about the size of a shoebox. I took it out with hands that had started shaking again. I sat down on the dusty floor of that abandoned bus station, with rain drumming on the roof somewhere above me, and I opened the bag. Inside was a key, a large, heavy, brass key, old, ornate, the kind of key you see in a museum, with a round head and a bit that looked like the mouth of some strange, gentle animal. Under the key, a piece of paper, folded, yellowed, brittle at the creases. I opened it. A hand-drawn map, in black ink, my grandmother's ink. I recognized the place immediately, the Whitcomb farm, outside Willow Bend, 12 acres. A little farmhouse, collapsing barn, and behind the house, running north into a stand of cottonwoods. A dotted line, ending at what looked like the old oak, with a small, careful X drawn beside it. An X, like something out of a story a child would draw. But my grandmother had drawn it, so it wasn't a story. It was a road. Under the map, one more thing. A letter, thicker than the first, sealed with a bit of wax. I broke the seal. My Hazel Marie, you found it. Good girl. I never doubted you. Now listen to me, because what I am about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about your family. First, the farm is yours. It has been in trust since the day I was diagnosed. There is a lawyer in Willow Bend. His name is Arthur Beaumont. Old friend. Older than the hills. You can trust him. Tell him I sent you. Show him this letter. He has the deed. Second, the farm is worthless to most people. It has back taxes owed, and a corporation named Meridian Holdings has been trying to buy it, from me for 6 years. You will get a letter from them within a week. Do not sell. Do you hear me, child? Do not sell that land. Not for any price. Not for a single dollar. If you sell that land, you will be handing over the only piece of ground on this earth that stands between your family and the men who took your mother and father from us. I have to stop right there. I put the letter down. The men who took your mother and father from us. My mother, my father. They died in a car accident when I was 12. Everyone said so. The police, the social worker, the pastor at the funeral, my grandmother herself. Car accident. On a rainy night. On Route 4, just outside Willow Bend. That was the story. That was the only story I had ever been told. Except, I closed my eyes, and a memory came up out of the dark like a fish rising to the surface of a pond. I was 12 years old. I was in my nightgown. Wesley was 10. He was crying. My mother's face was very close to mine. Her hands were on my shoulders. Her voice was low and fast and terrible. Hazel, take your brother. Go out the back door. Run to the trees. Do not stop. Do not come back. Do not look. Do you understand me? Mama, do you understand me? I understood. I took Wesley's hand. I went out the back door. I ran to the trees. I did not stop. I did not look. I heard glass break somewhere behind me. I heard my father shout something. And then I heard nothing at all. Except my own breathing. And Wesley's crying. And the wind in the cottonwoods. For 6 years I had told myself that was a dream. For 6 years I had told myself I made it up. Because a 12-year-old brain does strange things with grief. Because I couldn't accept that a car accident had swallowed them whole. Because I needed a scene, a moment, a way to say goodbye. I had convinced myself it wasn't real. But sitting on that dusty floor, with my grandmother's key in one hand and her letter in the other, I knew it had never been a dream. It had been the last 5 minutes of my mother's life. I picked up the letter with hands that would not stop shaking, and I kept reading. Go to the farm, my sweet girl. Take the key. Take the map. Follow the path behind the house. It will lead you to something I built a long time ago, with my own 2 hands, for you and for Wesley. Do not go with anyone. Do not tell anyone. Not yet. There is much you do not know about our family, about your father, about the reason I had to give you and Wesley up to the state 2 years ago. Please believe me when I tell you this. Every choice I ever made was to keep you alive. Every choice. I know you must have hated me for a long time, for letting them take you, for not fighting harder, for pretending to be weaker than I was. I hope when you have read what I have left for you at the end of that path, you will understand. And maybe, if the Lord is kind, you will forgive me. Go home, Hazel Marie. Go home to Willow Bend. Grandma. I sat there for a long time. Rain on the roof. Wind in the empty station. My grandmother's silver cross warm against my collarbone. And I understood. I understood that everything I thought I knew about my life was one small piece of a much larger picture. And my grandmother had been protecting me from that picture for as long as she'd drawn breath. She had let me hate her. She had let me hate her, so that I would be safe. I couldn't think about that yet. It was too big. It was too much. So I did what my grandmother had told me to do. I picked up the key. I folded the map. I put the letter in my inside coat pocket, next to my heart. I closed the canvas bag, and I walked back out, through the broken window, into the rain. I walked to the gas station on the corner. I asked the man behind the counter how to get to Willow Bend. He looked at me over his newspaper. Willow Bend? Yes, sir. Ain't seen a greyhound go through Willow Bend in about 10 years, sweetheart. Is there any way to get there? He tapped his newspaper thoughtfully. Cousin of mine's a trucker. Runs feed down that way twice a week. He's out back right now getting coffee. $2.50 if you don't mind riding in the passenger seat and listening to Merle Haggard. I would have listened to a chainsaw for $2.50. I nodded. He hollered through the back door. Roy, got a passenger for you. Roy was 60-something. Big beard, bigger belly, a cap that said, "This ain't my first rodeo." He looked at me. He looked at my canvas bag. He looked at my hands. And whatever he saw there, he just nodded once. Come on, Han. I'm heading south in 10. I climbed into the cab of a Peterbilt. Merle Haggard was, in fact, playing. And Roy didn't ask me a single question. Not who I was. Not where I came from. Not why an 18-year-old girl was hitching a ride to a town nobody had heard of on a Tuesday afternoon in November. He just drove. And the planes rolled past. And I clutched my grandmother's key in my lap, so hard the metal left a mark on my palm. We rolled into Willow Bend, Kansas at almost 4 in the afternoon. The town was smaller than I remembered. One paved main street, grain silos at the far end, catching the last silver light of the day. A white clapboard church with a steeple that leaned just a little to the east. A hardware store. A post office. A quilting supply shop with a closed on Sundays sign in the window. And in the middle of it all, glowing softly through the drizzle, a diner. Neon pink letters buzzing above the door. Miss Ellie's. Roy pulled the truck up to the curb. This far enough, hon? Yes, sir. Thank you. I put a $5 bill on the dashboard. He looked at it. He looked at me. He pushed it back. Keep your money, sweetheart. Get yourself a piece of pie. I climbed down onto the sidewalk. The truck pulled away. And once again I was standing alone. But this time, I wasn't in the middle of nowhere. This time I was in the middle of somewhere. The rain had softened to a mist. My hair was damp. My coat was damp. My hands were cold. But I was here. Willow Bend. The place my grandmother had come from. The place she had brought us to when I was 12. The place I had lived for 4 years before the state came and took us away. The place she had made me a map to. I stood there, on the sidewalk, in the mist, and I looked up at the pink neon sign above the diner. Miss Ellie's. Something about it pulled at me. I don't know why. Maybe because it was warm. Maybe because the windows were fogged from the inside, and I could see the shapes of people sitting at a counter. Maybe because I hadn't eaten since 7 in the morning, and my stomach was hollow. Maybe because a voice inside me, a quiet voice that sounded almost like my grandmother's, said, "Go in there, Hazel Marie. Go on in." So I did. I pushed open the door. A little bell jingled overhead. The smell of coffee and bacon and warm pie hit me like a hug. There were maybe a dozen people in the place. Farmers in seat caps. 2 old men in a booth playing checkers. A young mother with a baby on her hip. A waitress behind the counter, pouring coffee. The waitress looked up. She was in her late 60s. Silver hair curled tight. Pink apron. Reading glasses on her nose. She was mid-pour, coffee streaming into a mug. And she looked up when the bell rang. And she saw me. And she stopped. The coffee kept pouring. It overflowed the mug. Ran across the counter. Dripped onto the floor. She didn't notice. She was staring at me. Her mouth was open. Her hand was frozen on the coffee pot. And her eyes were suddenly, terribly full of water. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, sweet Lord in heaven." Every head in the diner turned to look at me. I froze. I did not know this woman. I did not know this woman. And she was crying. She set down the coffee pot. Very slowly, like a woman moving through a dream. She walked around the end of the counter. She walked toward me across the black and white checkered tile floor. And she did not stop until she was standing right in front of me, her face just inches from mine. "You're her," she whispered. "You're Della's Hazel." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. And then Miss Ellie Prescott, who I had never met in my life, wrapped her arms around me and held me. And I felt her whole body shake. And I heard her whisper into the top of my head. She said you'd come. She said one day you'd come. And I never stopped watching that door. The little bell above the door was still ringing softly. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded like my grandmother said, "You're home, my sweet girl. You're home." Miss Ellie Prescott held on to me for a long time. Longer than a stranger should hold a stranger. But she wasn't a stranger. Not really. Not to my grandmother. And when she finally let me go, and stepped back, and wiped her eyes, with the corner of her pink apron, she looked at me like I was a ghost, who had walked in, from a snowstorm 40 years ago. "Della's Hazel Marie," she said. "Look at you. Just look at you." I did not know what to say, so I said the only thing I could think of. "You knew my grandmother?" She let out a laugh that was half a sob. "Knew her? Honey, Della Whitcomb was the best friend I ever had in this life. 41 years. She used to sit right there." She pointed to a stool at the counter, third from the end. "Every Wednesday morning, coffee, 2 creams, 1 sugar, and a slice of peach pie if I had one warm." I looked at the stool. Empty. Waiting. Somebody had already left the newspaper folded on the counter for whoever came next. Miss Ellie touched my cheek. Just once. Like a woman making sure I was real. Sit down, child. You look like you haven't eaten since Sunday. It's only Tuesday, ma'am. She stopped. She looked at me, and a small, sad smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. Well then, that's a Della answer if I've ever heard one. Sit down, Hazel. Please. So I sat. Third stool from the end. And Miss Ellie went behind the counter. And she poured me coffee I hadn't asked for. And she cut me a slice of pie I hadn't asked for. And she put a bowl of chicken and dumplings in front of me. Steam rising. Real butter melting on top. And she said, "This one's on me. Every meal you eat in this diner, from here to Christmas, is on me. I do not want to hear one word about it." I opened my mouth. She held up a finger. "Not one word." I closed my mouth. I ate the way you eat when you have not been fed properly in a very long time. And I don't just mean food. I mean the way she was watching me eat. The way she kept looking at me, and shaking her head, and smiling and dabbing at her eyes. The way she kept saying under her breath, "Della, oh Della, if you could see her." The old men at the checkers board were pretending not to watch. They were watching. The young mother with the baby was pretending not to watch. She was watching. The whole diner had gone quiet in a way that wasn't unfriendly. Just waiting. Like the whole town had been holding its breath for 2 years. And now, finally, it could exhale. Miss Ellie sat down on the stool next to me. Her hands folded on the counter. "Where you staying tonight, sweetheart?" "I don't know yet, ma'am." "Do you have money?" "Some. $63. She closed her eyes for a second, like she was praying. Then she opened them. "You're staying with me." "That's not a question. That's a fact of the universe. My back bedroom has a quilt on it my mother made in 1962. It's yours as long as you need it." "Ma'am, I can't." "Honey." She put her hand on mine. Her hand was warm and lined and soft, and it smelled like flour. "Your grandmother saved my life in 1988. Now, I have been waiting 37 years for a chance to pay her back. Do not take that from me." I looked at her, and I said, "Yes, ma'am, because what else can you say, when the world has been closing doors on you for 2 years? And a stranger opens one, and says, 'Come in.' You say, 'Yes, ma'am.' You say, 'Yes, ma'am,' and you mean it." Miss Ellie drove me over to see Arthur Beaumont that same afternoon. His office was above the closed-down bakery on Main Street, up a wooden staircase that creaked in 3 separate places. A frosted glass door with black letters that just said, "A. Beaumont, Attorney at Law." Miss Ellie knocked. Twice. The door opened. The man who stood there was 72 years old. Tall. Stooped a little. White fringe of hair around a bald crown. Wire-rimmed glasses. A cardigan the color of dry moss, with leather patches on the elbows. He was holding a coffee cup that said, "World's Okayest Grandpa." He looked at Miss Ellie. Then he looked at me, and the coffee cup slipped an inch in his hand. "Ellie," he said. "Oh, Ellie, is this?" "It is. Della's girl. Della's girl." He set the coffee cup down on a small table by the door, slowly, like his hands weren't entirely trusting him. Then he said, "Come in, child. Please, come in." The office smelled like pipe tobacco and old law books, and Kansas dust, and decades of quiet, patient work. There were files stacked on every flat surface, fishing pictures on the wall, a framed photograph on his desk of a woman, with kind eyes, who I guessed had been Mrs. Beaumont and who I guessed was no longer with us. He sat down behind the desk. He took off his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief that had his initials on it, put them back on, and he looked at me. "Your grandmother," he said, "told me you would come one day. She said it would be on your 18th birthday. Or shortly after. She said I was to give you what she left behind. And she said," he paused, swallowed. "She said I was to trust you the way I trusted her." I nodded. I did not know what else to do. He opened a bottom drawer of his desk. He pulled out a thick manila folder, tied with a red string. He set it on the desk between us. "This is the deed to the farm. 12 acres. free and clear of any mortgage. Your grandmother paid it off in 2016, with money she'd been saving her whole life. He touched the folder. There are also 4 years of unpaid property taxes on that land. $8,240. The county has been patient, out of respect for Della. But that patience has an expiration date. I have been holding them off. I cannot hold them off forever. $8,240. I had $63 in my pocket. He was still speaking. And this. He slid another envelope across the desk. Crisp, white, professional, with a return address printed in blue ink. Meridian Holdings, LLC, Kansas City, Missouri. I opened it, and I read, a generous offer. That's what the letter called it. To purchase the Whitcomb property outside Willow Bend. For the sum of, I had to read the number twice. $340,000. $340,000. For 12 acres of scrub and 1 collapsing farmhouse. My hands started shaking, because that was more money than I had ever seen. More money than I had ever imagined seeing. That was a house for me and Wesley. That was a lawyer for custody. That was a bank account. That was food. That was a coat that fit. That was a life. I looked up at Mr. Beaumont. Should I sell? He did not answer right away. He looked at me for a long moment, over the top of his wire-rimmed glasses, and then he said something very quiet. Miss Whitcomb, your grandmother has been receiving that same offer, every 6 months, for 6 years. She refused it every single time, even at the end, when she was so sick she could barely hold a pen. She refused it. She wrote them a letter I helped her mail. It said, you will not have that land while I draw breath. And you will not have it after I am gone. He tapped the letter. So I would like to ask you to do something before you decide. I would like you to read your grandmother's letter again. And then I would like you to drive out to that farm. And I would like you to walk the land she left you. Before you sign anything. Before you take a single dollar from these people. Miss Ellie was standing by the window. She had gone very quiet. I put the letter down. Mr. Beaumont, who is Meridian Holdings? He looked at Miss Ellie. Miss Ellie looked at the floor. Then Mr. Beaumont looked at me. And he chose his words like a man walking on thin ice. That, Miss Whitcomb, is a question I would rather you answered for yourself. At the farm, where your grandmother has, I believe, prepared an answer for you. He handed me a ring of keys. This one is the house. This one is the barn. This one starts your grandmother's old Ford truck. I put a new battery in it 2 weeks ago. In case. I looked at him. In case of what, sir? He gave me a small, tired smile. In case you came. Miss Whitcomb. She never doubted you would. Miss Ellie drove me back to the diner and put me in Grandma Della's old blue Ford Ranger. The truck started on the first turn of the key, like it had been waiting for me. You know how to drive standard, honey? Grandma taught me. Of course she did. Della wouldn't have raised a girl who couldn't work a clutch. You go on out there. You spend the afternoon. You call me if you need me. My number's on the back of the visor. And Hazel. She leaned in through the window. Don't be scared of what you find. I looked at her. Do you know what I'm going to find, Miss Ellie? She hesitated. Then she said, I know your grandmother, and I know she never did one thing in her whole life that wasn't out of love. Whatever she left out there for you was left in love. She kissed my forehead, right there on Main Street, like I was hers, and then she stepped back and let me drive away. The Whitcomb farm was 3.5 miles outside town. I took the county road east, past a herd of black cows standing in the mist, past a field of picked corn, past a hand-painted sign that said fresh eggs, honor system, $3 a dozen. And I remembered being 12 years old, in the passenger seat of that same truck. My grandmother driving, the radio playing an old country station, my little brother asleep against my shoulder in the back. My grandmother reaching over to squeeze my knee and saying, you are going to be okay, my Hazel Marie. I promise you, You are going to be okay. I turned onto the long gravel driveway, and I saw it. The farmhouse. Sagging porch. Peeling white paint. 2 upstairs windows dark like empty eyes. Ivy crawling up the north side. A collapsed section of the front gutter. Weeds up to my knees where the yard used to be. It looked worse than I remembered. It looked abandoned. And it looked like home. Both. At the same time. Somehow. I parked the truck. I got out. I walked up the porch steps. 2 of them were rotten through and I had to skip them. I put the key in the front door. I stopped. I couldn't do it. Not yet. Because the second I opened that door I was going to smell her. I was going to smell rosemary and lavender and old paper and ivory soap. I was going to smell my grandmother. And I wasn't ready. So I did what she told me to do first. I took out the map. And I walked around the back of the house. The path was there. Just as she'd drawn it. Almost invisible. A soft depression in the tall dead grass. Winding out toward the stand of cottonwoods. Their leaves long gone. Their branches gray and thin against the November sky. I followed it. The wind was cold. My coat was too big. My grandmother's silver cross was cold against my collarbone. I walked for maybe 10 minutes. The ground rose, then dipped, then rose again, and then I came around a bend in the path, and I saw the old oak. The oak was enormous. Enormous the way only prairie trees are enormous. Because they have to fight for every inch of themselves. Because the wind never stops. Because there is nothing to hide behind. The oak had stood there for 200 years. And at its base was a mound of earth. Covered in dead leaves. Overgrown with prairie grass. But if you knew what you were looking at, you could see. That mound was not natural. That mound had been built. I knelt down. I brushed away the leaves. I brushed away the dirt. And I felt it. Metal. Cold, cold metal. I dug faster. Both hands now. My grandmother's silver cross swinging out from my collar. My hair coming loose. My knees soaked through with wet earth. And there, under 6 inches of prairie soil and 40 years of fallen leaves, a steel door, set into the side of the mound. Old, painted dark green, almost black with age. A heavy iron lock in the center. The shape of the keyhole matched exactly the shape of my grandmother's brass key. My whole body went cold. And then hot. And then cold again. I took the key out of my pocket. My hand was shaking. So hard I dropped it. I picked it up. I slid it into the lock. I turned. Click. The sound was so soft. But it was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. Because it was the sound of my grandmother saying, from beyond the grave, "Come in, my sweet girl. Come see what I have kept for you." I pulled the door open. It resisted. Swollen. Stiff. But it moved. With a low groan that sounded almost human. A wave of cold, dry, ancient air rolled out. And it smelled like her. It smelled like her. Like rosemary. And old paper. And ivory soap. And a kind of clean, mineral smell that was underneath all of it. The smell of stone and time. I fumbled in my coat pocket for the little flashlight I'd bought at the gas station in Millbrook. I clicked it on. And I looked down. Wooden stairs. 7 of them. Leading down into darkness. I went down. The air got colder. The walls closed in on either side. Stone. Rough cut. Smooth in places where hands had passed over the same spot 1,000 times. At the bottom of the stairs, my light caught something. Pull chain. Hanging from the ceiling. Pulled it. And a single bare bulb flickered on overhead. I saw the room. It was maybe 15 feet across. 20 feet long. Walls of stone. A wooden ceiling reinforced with heavy beams. Bone dry. Clean. Not the kind of place that could have existed by accident. Someone had built this. My grandmother had built this. Along one wall was a workbench. Old tools I did not recognize. Wire cutters. A soldering iron. A magnifying lamp on a swing arm. Small drawers labeled in her handwriting. Fuses. Screws. Wire. Along another wall, shelves. Mason jars. Neatly labeled. Some full of what looked like tea. Some full of what looked like dried beans. Some empty, waiting. At the far end, on a small wooden table, a green metal footlocker, army surplus, the kind soldiers used to have. And on top of the footlocker, held down by a smooth river stone, was a single folded sheet of paper. I walked toward it. My footsteps were the only sound in the world. I lifted the stone. I unfolded the paper. My Hazel Marie, you found it. Sit down, sweet girl. What comes next may take a while. I sat down on the cold stone floor. I opened the footlocker. The inside was full of envelopes. Manila, sealed with wax. Each one numbered in my grandmother's shaky, careful hand. 1 through 42. All the way to the bottom. On top of them all was a thicker envelope. My name on the front. I opened it. Inside was a stack of paper. Thin, onion skin, dozens of pages, and a small collection of photographs. I looked at the photographs first, because I recognized the first face. My father. I had almost forgotten what he looked like. In 6 years, his features had gotten blurry in my memory. Hair color, the exact shape of his smile. Those things had faded. I only remembered a feeling, a big, warm, laughing feeling, and a smell like Old Spice and pencil shavings. But there he was. Young, maybe 30, standing in front of a newsroom desk, a press badge clipped to his shirt, squinting at the camera with a half-smile, holding up a coffee mug. Underneath the picture, in my grandmother's handwriting, Daniel, Kansas City Herald, 2011. The next photograph. My mother, Rosalind Whitcomb, Rosie. She had my chin, or I had hers. She was standing at the counter of a kitchen, I remembered, holding up a birthday cake with candles on it. 6 candles. My 6th birthday. She was laughing. The next photograph. My mother and father together, in a car, in a parking lot at night, turned toward the back seat, their faces caught in the flash. Both of them looking over their shoulders. Both of them looking scared. Not surprised scared. Real scared. The kind of scared that lives underneath the surface for a long time, before it comes out. Underneath, my grandmother had written, the last picture, 2 weeks before, 2 weeks before, 2 weeks before what? I picked up the letter. I started to read. My darling Hazel Marie. Now, at last, we come to the truth. I have carried this truth alone for 6 years. It has been the heaviest thing I have ever carried. Heavier than losing your grandfather. Heavier than losing my Daniel and Rosie. Heavier even than the day I had to let the state take you and Wesley from me. Please, please, before you judge me for any of it, read all the way to the end. Your father was a journalist. You knew that, but you did not know what kind. Daniel was an investigative reporter. He specialized in white-collar crime, money laundering, corporate fraud. He was very good at what he did. Too good. In the winter of 2018, he was working on the biggest story of his life. A shell company operating out of Kansas City, Missouri, called Meridian Holdings. Meridian, the name in the letter on Mr. Beaumont's desk. I kept reading. On the surface, Meridian bought rural land across 5 states. Farms, old motels, failing resorts. Places nobody wanted. Places that never seemed to make any money. Which was the point, because Meridian was not really in the property business. Meridian was moving dirty money for some very dangerous men. Men who did not want to be seen. Your father found this out. He had documents. He had records. He had sworn statements from 3 people who worked inside the company. He was going to break the story in April. He told me on the phone the week before Easter. The next week, he and Rosie were dead. The police called it a car accident. On Route 4, outside Willow Bend, in the rain. But there was no car found. No bodies found. Just a burned-out ditch and their wallets. The official cause of death was declared a hit and run. The case was closed within 4 months. I have known, since the day it happened, that it was not an accident. I have known who was responsible, and I have known that they were not finished. I set the letter down. I could not breathe. I could not breathe. Because a memory came back to me, all at once. like a door swinging open in a wind. My mother's face, very close to mine, her hands on my shoulders, her voice low and fast. Hazel, take your brother. Go out the back door. Run to the trees. Do not stop. Do not come back. Do not look. I understood. I finally understood. That wasn't the moment of the accident. That was the moment my mother knew they were coming. I picked the letter up again. My eyes were blurry. I could barely see. They came for you next, sweet girl, because they thought your father might have passed the evidence to his family. To me, to you, they thought he might have hidden it in his house, in his desk, in your school backpack, anywhere. So they searched, and they watched, and they waited. I knew they were watching. I had to hide you. I had to hide you somewhere they would never think to look. So I did something that broke my heart. It broke my heart, Hazel Marie, and it broke it again every day for the 2 years afterward. And I would do it 1,000 more times, if that is what it took to keep you and your brother alive. I let them think I was dying. I stopped taking my heart medicine, on purpose. So the doctors would say I could not care for 2 children anymore. I put on a good show. I fell down at the grocery store. I let a caseworker find me confused in my own kitchen. I begged the state to help. I cried in front of a judge. And when they came to take you and your brother into foster care 2 years ago, I let them. I let them. The 2 of you were the most precious things in this world to me. And I let them take you, because that was the safest place to hide you, right under Meridian's nose, in a state system so big and so paper-heavy that even they could not track 2 children lost inside it. I signed the papers using my maiden name, Ainsworth, not Whitcomb. I told a small lie in the paperwork. I said you were the children of a distant cousin. It bought us a filing error that took them years to untangle. That filing error is the only reason you and Wesley are alive right now. I never abandoned you. I never abandoned you. I hid you, in the only way I knew how, and every single Wednesday morning, until the day I could no longer get out of bed, I drove to Miss Ellie's diner, and I sat in the 3rd stool from the end, and I drank 1 cup of coffee with 2 creams and 1 sugar. And I looked out that window, and I prayed for you, and I prayed for your brother, and I prayed the day would come when I could tell you the truth. I did not live to see that day, but you are reading this, which means you are alive, which means you found the key, which means you have come home. The letter went on. There were pages more, names of people to trust, names of people not to trust, instructions for what to do with the numbered envelopes, instructions for how to contact a lawyer in Wichita, a woman named Frances Kowalski, at the Department of Justice who had once worked with my father. But I couldn't read any more. Not right then. I set the letter down, and I put my forehead against the cold stone floor, and I cried. I cried in a way I had never cried in my life. Not a pretty cry, not a movie cry, a full-body animal cry, the kind of crying you do when a whole story you have believed about yourself falls out from underneath you, and you are hanging in the air, and nothing you thought was true is true. She hadn't abandoned us. She hadn't abandoned us. For 2 years I had let her memory carry the weight of that word. Abandoned. I had let strangers say it about her. I had let case workers say it about her. I had said it about her in my own head, in the dark, in a group home bed, when I was too angry, and too sad, and too tired to remember who she really was. And the whole time, she had been drowning to keep our heads above water. She had let them call her weak, so they wouldn't call her dangerous. She had let them call her forgetful, so they wouldn't call her a witness. She had let the whole world think she was a broken old woman who couldn't take care of 2 grandchildren, because Meridian Holdings was watching, and a broken old woman does not look like a threat. I don't know how long I stayed on that stone floor. The single light bulb hummed overhead. Above me, 3 feet of earth, and beyond that, a Kansas sky turning purple with evening. I sat up. I wiped my face. I wiped it again. And then, because I had promised my grandmother, I kept reading. I read every page. I read the names of the men she suspected, I read the address of Francis Kowalski. I read the paragraph where she explained that the numbered envelopes contained copies of my father's evidence, sworn statements, financial records, bank transfers, the whole map of how Meridian moved dirty money. And at the very bottom of the footlocker, under all the papers, wrapped in a rubber-banded plastic bag, was cash. Neat banded stacks, 20s, 50s, a few hundreds, not a fortune, but not nothing. I counted it, twice, because my hands were still shaking. $12,400. A little handwritten card was tucked in with the bills, for the back taxes, and for a new beginning. Do not sell the land. Fight for your brother. I love you, Grandma. I sat there for a long time, with the light bulb humming, and the smell of my grandmother in the air, and the truth about my whole life laid out around me in numbered envelopes. And slowly, very slowly, something in me began to change. The fear was still there. The grief was still there. But underneath the fear and the grief, a third thing was starting to grow. Something with roots. Something old. Something that had, apparently, always been in me, and had just been waiting for the right moment to wake up. I heard my grandmother's voice in my head, as clear as if she were sitting on the workbench beside me. Every choice I ever made was to keep you alive. Now, my Hazel Marie, it is your turn. By the time I climbed out of the cellar, the sun had gone all the way down. The prairie sky was black and full of stars. So many stars. City stars are nothing. City stars are a rumor. Kansas stars are a fact. I stood at the mouth of the cellar in the cold, my breath making little clouds in the air, my grandmother's silver cross warm under my shirt, the green footlocker safely stowed, the door pulled shut and locked behind me. I looked up, and I said, out loud, into the dark, "Okay, Grandma, okay, I hear you." The wind moved in the cottonwoods. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. I walked back to the farmhouse. I made myself unlock the front door. I stepped inside, and it smelled exactly like I knew it would. Rosemary, lavender, old paper, ivory soap. I did not cry this time. This time I turned on a lamp. I sat down in her rocking chair. I pulled a wool blanket over my knees, and I picked up my cracked prepaid phone. I called Miss Ellie. She picked up on the second ring. Hazel? Hazel, honey, are you all right? I've been sick with worry. Miss Ellie. Yes, baby. I'm going to need your help. A pause. Then, quietly, whatever you need, child. I took a breath. I looked around the little living room, at the cross-stitched pillow on the couch that said, "Bless this home," at the black and white wedding photo on the mantel, at the empty coat hook by the door where my grandmother's blue church coat used to hang. I closed my eyes, and I saw my brother's face. "Come get me, Hayes." I opened my eyes. "Miss Ellie," I said, "I am not going to sell this land. Not now. Not ever. I am going to fix up this farmhouse. And I am going to bring my little brother home." There was a long pause on the other end. And then Miss Ellie Prescott, who had been waiting 37 years to help pay back a debt to my grandmother, took in a breath, and I heard her voice break a little, and she said something I will remember until the day I die. "Well then, sweetheart, you just tell me when to start swinging a hammer. Because you are not doing one single bit of this alone." I hung up the phone. I sat in my grandmother's rocking chair, and in the quiet of that old farmhouse, in the middle of the Kansas plains, with the wind moving softly against the windows, I made a promise. Not out loud, just in my own heart, where the only witness was the woman, who was no longer there to hear it. I whispered it anyway. "Grandma, I'm going to finish what you started. I'm going to bring Wesley home, and I'm going to make sure the men who took our mother and father never take another family from anyone else, as long as I am alive." The wind moved in the cottonwoods. The stars turned slowly overhead, and out in the dark, 3.5 miles from town, an old farmhouse light came on in an upstairs window for the first time in 2 years. The next morning I paid the taxes, $8,240, in cash. counted out on the linoleum counter of the Kiowa County Courthouse in front of a woman named Peggy, who wore 3 cardigans stacked on top of each other and had a coffee mug that said, "I run on Jesus and caffeine." Peggy counted the money 3 times. She looked up at me. She looked at the receipt. She looked at me again. "Whitcomb," she said. "That's Della's land." "Yes, ma'am." "Della's granddaughter." "Yes, ma'am." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she stamped the receipt, hard, twice, and she slid it across the counter with a hand that had a wedding ring on it thin as a wire. "Welcome home, honey." I walked out of that courthouse with a receipt in my pocket that said the land was mine. Clean, clear, nobody's but mine. I sat in my grandmother's blue Ford Ranger in the parking lot. I put my forehead on the steering wheel, and I breathed, for the first time in 6 years. I just breathed. The next thing I did was find Mr. Beaumont. He was already waiting for me, in his office, with his cardigan and his coffee mug and his wire-rimmed glasses. He had a legal pad open on his desk, blank, pen in his hand. He nodded when I walked in. "Miss Whitcomb." "Mr. Beaumont, you paid the taxes." "I did." "You are not selling." "I am not." He smiled, just a little, around the corners. "Good." He tapped the legal pad. "Then we have work to do. I am going to file a preliminary injunction against Meridian Holdings this afternoon, on the grounds of irregularities in their prior survey filings. It is a thin argument. I want it to be thin. I want them to have to spend time and money answering it. I want them tied up in paperwork for the next 6 months, while you make that farmhouse livable, and while I file the first petition for guardianship of your brother." I sat down. "Mr. Beaumont." "Yes." "Do you know what Meridian Holdings really is?" He looked at me over his glasses, for a long, long time. Then he said, "I know what your grandmother told me, and I know what I saw with my own eyes in a courtroom in Topeka in 1978. Which is why, Miss Whitcomb, I am going to help you, and I am going to help you for free, every hour, until this is done." I opened my mouth. He held up a hand. "Do not argue with an old man about his own money, child. It is unseemly. Now, let us begin." We began. That was the first week of November. By Thanksgiving, the roof did not leak in 3 spots. Only 2. By Christmas, the front porch had 2 new posts. The stairs had been replaced. The screen door hung straight. I had cleaned every window in the house on a step ladder. That scared Miss Ellie so badly she had to sit down in a lawn chair with her hand over her heart. I was learning to build a life, board by board, nail by nail, with hands that had never held a hammer before in their life. I was not doing it alone. Emmett Whitfield ran the hardware store on Main Street, 60-something, steel gray beard, steel gray eyes, a voice like gravel in a coffee can. He had known my grandmother. The first time I walked into his store in a coat that didn't fit and asked him for roofing tar, he did not smile. He did not welcome me. He did not say a kind word. He just said, "You're doing it wrong." Then he spent 45 minutes showing me the right way. Then he charged me for the tar. Full price, not 1 penny off, because Emmett Whitfield did not do charity. But when I got back to the truck, there was an extra bucket of tar in the bed that I hadn't bought, that he hadn't rung up, that neither of us ever spoke of. The next week I came in for 2x4s. He grunted at me. He said, "You're gonna cut those wrong too." He showed me the right way. The next week I came in for wiring. The next week for insulation. By January, Emmett Whitfield had, without ever once being nice about it, taught me how to build a wall, how to hang a door, how to run a copper pipe, how to solder a joint, how to wire an outlet without electrocuting myself. And every single time I walked out of that hardware store, there was something extra in my truck bed I hadn't paid for. I stopped thanking him, because thanking him made him angry. Instead, I would just look at him and nod, and he would nod back. And that was our whole conversation for 6 months. That was Emmett Whitfield. On the first Sunday of December, Miss Ellie made me go to church. She did not ask. She stood in her back bedroom door at 7 in the morning. Pink robe, curlers in her hair, coffee in one hand. She said, "You are coming with me, and you are wearing this dress." The dress was navy blue with white buttons down the front. It was from 1974. It was the softest thing I had ever put on my body. Willow Bend Methodist Church was small, white clapboard, red front doors, a bell tower that leaned a little to the east. I walked in with Miss Ellie on my arm, and every single head in that sanctuary turned. I froze. Miss Ellie squeezed my hand. She whispered, "You are Cordelia Whitcomb's granddaughter. You hold your head up in this house." So I held my head up. We sat in the third pew from the front, Miss Ellie's usual pew. The service began, and I could not tell you a word of it, because I was watching the light come through the stained glass window behind the pulpit, and the little dust particles floating in the light, and I was thinking about my grandmother, sitting in a pew like this one, every Sunday, for 60 years. Then the pastor stood up, Pastor Josiah Reed, 75 years old, kind, weathered face, white hair going a little wild around his ears, walked with a slight stoop, but his voice was strong. He looked out over the congregation. His eyes landed on me. He paused. He smiled, just a little, like a man greeting somebody he had been waiting a long time to see. Then he opened his Bible. "This morning," he said, "I want to talk about mothers who hide their children in the reeds. The story of Moses, a woman who could not save her son. So she wove a little basket, and she waterproofed it, and she laid her baby in it, and she pushed the basket out into the river, and she trusted the current to carry him somewhere safer than her own arms." I put my hand over my mouth. Miss Ellie put her arm around my shoulders, and I cried in the third pew of Willow Bend Methodist Church, very quietly, because a woman named Cordelia Whitcomb had wrapped me in a paper basket 6 years ago, and pushed me out into the river, and trusted the current. And here I was, on the other shore, alive. After the service, they came for me. The quilting circle, 5 women, all in their 60s and 70s. Miss Ellie was one of them. The others were Ruthie Pruitt, Mavis Torgerson, Delphine Cassidy, and Bess Nolan. They descended on me like a small, cheerful army in pastel cardigans. Ruthie put a casserole in my hands. Mavis wrote her phone number on the back of an offering envelope. Delphine hugged me, so hard she lifted me off the ground, which was impressive because Delphine was 4'10" in her orthopedic shoes. Bess handed me a folded quilt, blue and white, handmade. "For your bed, sweetheart. Della never got to make you your wedding quilt. This one's just to hold you over." I did not know what to say. I said, "Thank you, ma'am," and Bess Nolan patted my cheek. And she said, "Honey, we've been holding you in prayer for 2 years. It is a pleasure to finally hand you a blanket." That was my first Sunday in Willow Bend. The Sunday I understood I was not alone. I have not missed one since. In January, I found the tape. I was cleaning out the cellar, sorting the numbered envelopes into a system Mr. Beaumont could use in court. I was on my knees behind the workbench, pulling out an old crate, and I saw it, a loose board, in the wall, just an inch off from the others. Pulled it out, and in the cavity behind, wrapped in oilcloth, was a cassette tape. Written on the label in my grandmother's shaky, tired hand were 3 words: "For Hazel, last." I sat down on the cold stone floor. I stared at the tape for a full minute. Then I drove to Miss Ellie's house, and I asked her if she still had her old tape player, the one she used to record hymns off the radio in 1987. She had it. Of course she had it. We sat at her kitchen table, the player between us, the tape loaded, my finger on the play button. Miss Ellie put her hand on mine. "You want me to leave, honey?" "No, ma'am. I want you to stay." She nodded. I pressed play. The hiss of old tape, a little scratch, a soft breath, and then my grandmother's voice, small, thin, coming from a hospital bed I never got to visit. "Hazel Marie, my sweet girl, if you are hearing this, Then everything went the way I hoped. You found the cellar. You found the letters. You made it home. Oh, my child. I am so proud of you. Miss Ellie made a sound like a wounded bird. I could not move. There are two things I could not put in a letter, because letters can be found. Voices are harder to find. So I am telling them to you now. Please write these down. She gave me two names. The first was Senator Harlan Trescott. She said he had taken payments from Meridian Holdings for 11 years. She said the money moved through a shell in Delaware. She said the evidence was in envelope number 31. The second was a woman, Frances Kowalski, United States Department of Justice, Public Corruption Unit, Kansas City Field Office. My grandmother said, she was a young lawyer when your father was alive. She believed him. She was not allowed to open a case then. She never forgot. If anyone in this country will still open the door for a Whitcomb, it is her. Call her. Tell her whose granddaughter you are. Tell her it is time. And then, at the end of the tape, my grandmother's voice went softer. Hazel Marie, I have to go now. My hand is tired. My chest is tired. My whole body is tired. But my heart is not tired. My heart still has plenty of room in it for you and Wesley. Please take care of your brother. Please tell him the story. He deserves to know. And please, my darling girl, do not spend one more day of your life being angry at me. I did what I did, because I loved you, and love, in the end, is the only thing worth doing anything for. I am so proud of you. I love you. Goodbye, my Hazel Marie. The tape hissed. Then it clicked. Then it stopped. Miss Ellie was crying in a way I had never seen a grown woman cry. Both hands over her mouth. Shoulders shaking. No sound at all. I sat there, very still, with my hands flat on her kitchen table. And I said, Miss Ellie. She looked up. Yes, baby. I need to call a woman in Kansas City. Frances Kowalski was in her mid-50s. She wore her hair short and gray. She had a voice on the phone like a woman who had been up since 4 in the morning her whole life. When I said, my name is Hazel Marie Whitcomb. My father was Daniel Whitcomb. He was a reporter at the Kansas City Herald in 2018. There was a very long silence. And then she said in a voice that was not entirely steady, Miss Whitcomb, what can I do for you? I said, I have something to give you. That my grandmother left me. It is about a company called Meridian Holdings. Another silence. Then, quietly, where are you? Willow Bend, Kansas. Do not put anything in the mail. Do not scan anything. Do not email anything. Do you have a lawyer? Yes, ma'am. Give me his name and number. I will be in Willow Bend on Friday. She hung up. Miss Ellie was standing behind me. I turned around. She looked at me, and she said, well then, I guess I had better make a pie. The next 4 months were the hardest of my life. And the best. I filed the guardianship petition through Mr. Beaumont. Ms. Loretta Hayes, my old caseworker, drove all the way from Wichita on a Saturday in February and sat in Miss Ellie's living room and cried for 20 minutes before she could speak. Because she had known. She had known parts of it. She had been the one, quietly, from her desk in Wichita, who had made sure Wesley and I never got sent too far apart. Who had made sure our files stayed with a caseworker she trusted. Who had, without ever saying a word to anyone, honored a promise she had made to Cordelia Whitcomb in a hospital corridor 2 weeks before my grandmother died. Loretta Hayes was Pastor Josiah's daughter. I did not know that. I found that out in Miss Ellie's living room over lukewarm coffee on a Saturday in February. The world, it turns out, is smaller than I thought. And a whole lot more people had been holding me up my entire life than I ever knew. Frances Kowalski came to Willow Bend. Twice. Then 3 times. Then a colleague came with her. Then 2 colleagues. They sat in Mr. Beaumont's office with the door closed for hours at a time. They took the numbered envelopes one by one in evidence bags. They flew a forensic accountant in from Denver. The federal investigation into Meridian Holdings and Senator Harlan Trescott did not happen fast. It happened careful. It happened right. I did not think about it every day, because I had a house to finish, and a brother to bring home. By March, the farmhouse had running water. Hot running water. In a kitchen sink and a bathroom sink and a clawfoot tub that Delphine Cassidy's grandson had helped me haul in from a salvage yard in Great Bend. By April, I had a working wood stove in the living room, and the wall behind it was covered in white shiplap I had put up with my own hands. Emmett Whitfield had taught me how. He watched me do the first 6 boards. He grunted twice. He said, "You'll do." He walked out of the house. I sat on the floor and cried for 10 minutes, because that was the nicest thing anyone had ever said to me. By May, I had a second bedroom finished. Painted soft yellow, with a window that looked out over the cottonwoods, and a hand-drawn sign taped to the door that said, Wes. The custody hearing was on the 3rd Tuesday of May. I wore a dress Miss Ellie had sewn me. Ivory linen. Simple. Buttons up the front. Bess Nolan had done my hair. She had pulled it back in a low knot, with a silver comb of her mother's tucked in. When she was finished, she stepped back, and she looked at me and she said, "Della is going to be so proud of you today, sweetheart." I did not cry. I could not cry, because Delphine Cassidy would have my head if I ruined the makeup she had applied to my face at 6 in the morning in Miss Ellie's kitchen. Mr. Beaumont drove me to the courthouse in his old gray Buick. Miss Ellie sat in the back seat. She held my hand the whole way. The courthouse was 3 counties over, in a town called Hutchinson. The judge was a woman named Margaret Silvers, 64 years old, silver bob, reading glasses, a stern face I had heard other lawyers whisper about. We walked into the courtroom. I looked to my left, and I saw them, the whole back row. Miss Ellie, Pastor Josiah, Loretta Hayes, Emmett Whitfield in a suit jacket that did not quite fit his shoulders, Ruthie Pruitt, Mavis Torgerson, Delphine Cassidy, Bess Nolan, Peggy from the courthouse in her 3 cardigans, Roy the trucker, with his "This Ain't My First Rodeo" hat clutched respectfully in his lap. The whole back row. For me. I turned to Mr. Beaumont. My eyes stung. He whispered, "Save it for the judge, Miss Whitcomb. She will want to see it." The state's lawyer spoke first. He talked about my age, my lack of steady employment, the remoteness of the farm. He said, "The court must consider what is best for the minor child, not what is emotionally satisfying for the sibling." Mr. Beaumont did not interrupt him. Mr. Beaumont let him talk. Then Mr. Beaumont stood up, slowly, with his stooped shoulders and his cardigan and his wire-rimmed glasses, and he laid out my case like a man building a wall, one perfect brick at a time. Bank statements, property deed, tax receipts, letters of support, photographs of the farmhouse. Now, the transformation was so complete that Judge Silvers took off her glasses, cleaned them, put them back on, and looked at the photographs again. Then Mr. Beaumont sat down, and Judge Silvers looked at me. "Miss Whitcomb, would you like to speak?" I stood up. My knees were shaking. I opened my mouth, and what came out was not what I had rehearsed. What came out was the truth. "Your Honor, I am 18 years old. I know that is young. I know I do not look like a legal guardian on paper." I paused. I looked at Judge Silvers. "But I want to tell you what I do have. I have a house that I built back with my own hands. I have a lawyer who has worked for 6 months for free because he made a promise to my grandmother. I have a woman named Miss Ellie, who has cooked me every dinner I have eaten since November. I have 5 ladies, from a quilting circle, who show up on Saturdays with paint brushes. I have a hardware store owner, who has taught me how to hang every door in that house. I have a caseworker, who has known my brother for 4 years, and who trusts me. And I have a whole back row of people from a town of 800, who took a day off work to sit behind me today." I took a breath. My grandmother trusted this town to take care of me when she could not. "Please, Your Honor, please let me finish what she started. Please let me bring my brother home." Judge Silvers looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at the back row. Then she looked at the state's lawyer. Then she looked back at me. Miss Whitcomb. Petition granted. Effective immediately. Miss Ellie made a sound in the back row that I will hear until the day I die. Wesley walked out of the group home in Wichita 6 days later. He was carrying one cardboard box. His whole life in one cardboard box. He was 16 years old. Freckles across his nose. That cowlick that never laid flat. And when he saw me, leaning against Grandma's blue Ford Ranger, in the parking lot, just standing there, he dropped the box. He ran. Caught him. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt whole again. On the drive home, Wesley rolled down the window and stuck his head out like a dog. You are gonna get bugs in your teeth, Wes. Worth it. That's a serious cowlick you've got going. I know. Grew it out for you special. Wanted you to feel welcomed home. I laughed so hard I almost missed our exit. He looked at me sideways. You laugh different now. How? Louder. And then he closed his eyes. And he smiled. And he did not say anything else for the last 40 miles. I told him some things on the drive home. I told him the farm was ours. I told him Grandma had left it to us. I told him Miss Ellie had a peach pie waiting. The rest I told him in the cellar. 2 nights later, under a bare light bulb, with the footlocker between us, and a wool blanket over both our shoulders. I told him about Meridian Holdings. I told him about our father, and our mother, and what they had really been trying to protect us from. I told him about Grandma, about the paper basket, about the river. He listened, very still. His face was pale in the light, not because he was afraid, because he was doing math, in his head, rearranging his whole life into a new shape. When I was finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, So, we're not the ones who got left behind. No, Wes. We're the ones who made it out. Yes. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. Then he looked at me, and a small, tired grin pulled at the corner of his mouth. Can I say something dumb? Always. I am so proud of Grandma. I put my forehead against his. I did not answer. I did not need to. 3 weeks after Wesley came home, they came for the barn. I did not see it happen. Wesley did. He was upstairs, in his yellow bedroom, drawing at his desk by the light of a single lamp. He looked out the window at midnight, and he saw a flicker, then a glow, then a wall of orange. The old grain barn behind the house, fully engulfed. Wesley ran downstairs screaming my name. We stood on the back porch, in our pajamas, and we watched 40 years of my grandmother's life burn. I called 911. The volunteer fire department got there in 20 minutes, which is fast for a farm 3.5 miles out of town. They saved the house. They lost the barn. The sheriff came at 3 in the morning, squatting in front of the ash pile with a flashlight. He was there for 2 hours. He came up to me on the porch just before sunrise. Ma'am. Yes, sir. That fire was set. On purpose. I did not answer. You have any idea who would do that to you? I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, Sheriff, if I gave you a name, would you make a phone call to a woman named Frances Kowalski in Kansas City at the Department of Justice? He looked at me for a very long time. Then he took his hat off and held it in both hands. And he said, Miss Whitcomb, you just tell me the number. They arrested Wade Harmon 2 days later. Wade Harmon had owned the gas station on the corner of 4th and Main since 1991. Everybody in Willow Bend knew Wade. Wade fixed your flat tire. Wade sold you your Powerball ticket. Wade waved at your kids from behind the counter. Wade had also, for the last 11 years, been quietly reporting on my grandmother to a man in Kansas City who worked for Meridian Holdings. Wade had watched me since the day I walked into Miss Ellie's diner. Wade had lit the match. When they walked him out of that gas station in handcuffs, half the town was standing on Main Street watching. Nobody said a word. Nobody had to. The federal case against Meridian Holdings broke in August. Senator Harlan Trescott was indicted on 22 counts. Meridian's assets were frozen. Its executives were arrested. Its holdings were seized. Frances Kowalski called me on a Wednesday morning. She said, "Miss Whitcomb, it is going to take years, but it is going to happen. Your father would be very proud." I could not speak. She said, quieter, "So would your grandmother." I hung up the phone. I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, and I looked out the window at the cottonwoods, and I said, "We did it, Grandma. We did it." The wind moved. I like to think she answered. One evening in September, Wesley came up from the cellar with something in his hands. A small wooden box, cedar, hand-carved, about the size of a shoebox. "I found this," he said, "under a floorboard, behind the workbench." We opened it together, at the kitchen table, with the last light of the day slanting through the west window. Inside was a stack of letters, 16 of them, written by our mother, Rosalind Whitcomb, Rosie. Every letter dated on a birthday. Some of them mine, some of them Wesley's, all of them written in blue ink, in a slanted, generous, hopeful hand. The hand of a woman who had believed she would live to hand them to us in person. She hadn't, but my grandmother had kept them. For 15 years. Never opened, never sent, just kept. In cedar, in dark, waiting for us. Wesley read the ones addressed to him. I read the ones addressed to me. We sat at the table for hours. The sun going down, the room going gold, then blue, then dim. Neither of us reaching for a light. The last one was mine, written on my 7th birthday. 15 years ago. Hazel Marie, my beautiful girl. You are 7 today. Today you lost your first tooth. You gave the tooth fairy a note asking her what her favorite color is. She wrote back green. You believed her. I hope when you are grown you will remember what it felt like to believe things. It is a beautiful way to move through the world. Never stop. If for any reason I am not there to hand you this letter, please know, you were loved, every day of your life, from the moment I first felt you inside me. Your father and I love you more than the sky is big. Take care of your brother. Love. Always. Your mama. I set the letter down. Wesley set his letter down. We looked at each other across the kitchen table. And we cried. We cried for a long time. Not the terrible cry from the cellar in November. A softer cry. A cry that felt like an ending. A cry that felt like coming home. A year has gone by since I sat in a folding chair in a gray government office in Wichita. I am 19 years old now. The farmhouse has curtains in every window. Yellow gingham in the kitchen. Blue calico in the living room. White eyelet in Wesley's room. A quilt on my bed, blue and white, that Bess Nolan made in 1974 for a wedding, that never happened and gave to me, because somebody ought to be sleeping under it. We have a garden. We have 12 chickens. We have a rooster named Franklin, who is a terrible person. We have a dog. A rescue mutt named Della. She sleeps in the hall between our 2 bedrooms every night. Wesley is a junior at Willow Bend High. He is drawing every day. Miss Ellie hangs his pictures in the diner. Truckers come from 3 counties away to eat pie under a Wesley Whitcomb original. Last week he told me he wants to be either an art teacher or a comic book writer. I told him he could be both. He said I was surprisingly cool for an old lady. I threw a dish towel at him. He caught it. He is happy. I work at Whitfield's Hardware in the mornings. Emmett is teaching me carpentry. He has not once called me by my name. He calls me you. I answer to it. Mr. Beaumont still meets with me every second Wednesday to go over the federal case. It is slow. It is careful. It is going the right way. Ms. Loretta Hayes comes for Sunday dinner once a month. The quilting circle meets in my living room on Tuesdays. Miss Ellie stops by every Saturday morning to check on me. She pretends she is dropping off leftover pie. We both know why she is really coming. Last Sunday at Willow Bend Methodist, I stood at the front of the church. Pastor Josiah put his hand on my head, and he prayed. I was not being baptized. I was being rededicated, which is what Methodists call it. When somebody who has been baptized before as a baby comes back to the water as an adult. On their own. Because they chose to. I chose to. I stood in front of that congregation. In a white dress. With my grandmother's silver cross around my neck. And Wesley in the front pew in a suit jacket that was a little too big for him. And Miss Ellie in the third pew. And the whole quilting circle. And Emmett Whitfield standing in the very back, in the same suit jacket he had worn to my custody hearing. Pastor Josiah touched my forehead with water. And he said, "In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Welcome home, Hazel Marie." I closed my eyes, and I heard my grandmother's voice, very clear, very close. She said, "You're home, my sweet girl. You're home." Sometimes late at night, I sit on the front porch of the farmhouse. Wesley is asleep upstairs. Della the dog is curled at my feet. The Kansas plains stretch out in front of me all the way to a horizon I cannot see. The stars come out, so many stars, and I think about my grandmother. I think about a woman named Cordelia Whitcomb, who let the whole world call her weak, so her enemies would look the wrong way, who let her only grandchildren hate her for 2 years, who kept a footlocker of evidence buried in a stone cellar under a mound of dirt, who wrote me letters from a hospital bed with a shaking hand, who mailed a key to a lawyer she trusted, who never wavered, not once, in 60 years. I think about my mother, who wrote letters to a daughter she believed she would live to see grown, who lost that bet, whose words waited for me in Cedar for 15 years. I think about my father, who chased a story down a long dark road, because it was true, and true was the only thing he knew how to serve. I think about all the women in this town, who lifted me up. I think about the men who taught me, without ever saying they were teaching me. I think about all the people who prayed for me, before they ever knew my name. And I want to say something to you, whoever you are, wherever you are, watching this. If you have ever felt like the world was closing doors on you, if you have ever felt invisible, unloved, left behind, if somebody you needed to trust has ever let you down, or died, or walked away, or been taken from you before you were ready to lose them, I need you to hear me. You are not alone. You are not alone. There are people in this world you have not met yet, who have already been praying for you. There are strangers waiting to become your family. There are doors that have not opened for you yet, and they will. The current is carrying you somewhere. Trust the current. And someday, my darling, you will look up, and you will find yourself on the other shore, and you will realize you were never being thrown out. You were being sent to the place where you were always meant to be. That is what my grandmother taught me. That is what she left me. In a footlocker, under an oak tree, in a hidden cellar, in the middle of the Kansas plains. Not the land, not the money, not even the truth. She left me the whole town of Willow Bend. She left me a brother safe under my own roof. She left me a life. That was Cordelia Whitcomb's real inheritance. That was the real gift. If the story touched your heart tonight, please stay with us. Please subscribe. Please tell me, in the comments below, about your own river, about the current that carried you to the shore you never expected.